It is indeed a pleasure and a privilege to be here on this podium tonight, on this platform, talking to you at this very special year, the exact date of White Lotus Day having been on May 8th, 1991, 100 years of commemorating the death of H.P. Blavatsky on May 8th, 1881. So appropriately, the whole year is devoted to paying tribute once again to this most fascinating and mysterious woman. I have been able to procure for you a tape called White Lotus Day, which is a talk given by Boris Dezerkov, who was the last living relative of Madame Blavatsky. And in it, he outlined some of the things that have come to pass that she predicted in The Secret Doctrine, other things that did not come to pass, and how she founded this school, the outer court being the Theosophical Society, and the inner school being what we term the Theosophical movement. And so I have, in determining what might be of interest to you tonight, selected from the Mahatma letters, the horse's mouth, the material. I have excerpted 2 letters from which we will read. The underlined passages we will read together, and I put the whole letter in there because my point would be to hope to elicit your interest in reading and studying these books. So we have the Mahatma letters, and I've excerpted one article from volume 10 of the collected writings that is a very important article and has to do with our subject tonight. And I've also excerpted 2 sections from the Countess Wachtmeister's Reminiscences of HPB and the Secret Doctrine, and one of the letters of H.P. Blavatsky herself that is in that book, HPB Letters to A.P. Sinnett. Now, I would like to ask you, and then, if we have time, we have the literary achievements of HPB, listing 7 different ways in which she wrote. And this is largely drawn from the book H.P. Blavatsky, Tibet and Tulku, a book written by Jeffrey Barborka that you may even have heard of or remember, because when he lived in Oak Park, he spent a lot of time here teaching the Secret Doctrine. Tibet and Tulku expounds in great detail the 7 different ways that she wrote and gives examples of each of these categories. And we have just a little synopsis for you, which if we don't get through to tonight, you will have to read. Now, the first letter that I'm going to read is letter in the section Probation and Chelaship, letter number 26. It's the first one in your packet. Now, this letter was autumn 1881, and A.P. Sinnett and A.O. Hume were the 2 lay chelas who were the recipients of the Mahatma letters. And out of this, Sinnett wrote 2 excellent books, one called The Occult World, which was the first book, and then from the teachings that had been in these letters, he wrote the second book, Esoteric Buddhism. They're still widely distributed and widely read. These two gentlemen didn't understand H.P. Blavatsky, and we will come to a section where even her very close chum and co-worker, Henry Steele Olcott, didn't understand her too. And the Countess Wachtmeister explains that she didn't understand her because the training and the type of person that HPB was so far advanced from where we are in our ordinary consciousness that it would be rather difficult for us to understand what she was about, much of which were orders from the Mahatmas that she couldn't talk about, and therefore she was generally an enigma. So the Master Kudhumi is trying to explain to the two gentlemen about HPB, and this letter is especially important because it states very directly that she was their agent. I am painfully aware of the fact that the habitual incoherence of her statements, especially when excited, and her strange ways, make her, in your opinion, a very undesirable transmitter of our messages. Nevertheless, kind brothers, once that you have learned the truth, once told that this unbalanced mind, the seeming incongruity of her speeches and ideas, her nervous excitement, all that in short, which is so calculated to upset the feelings of sober-minded people, whose notions of reserve and manners are shocked by such strange outbursts of what they regard as her temper, and which so revolt you. Once that you know that nothing of it is due to any fault of hers, you may perchance be led to regard her in quite a different light. Notwithstanding that the time is not quite ripe to let you entirely into the secret, and that you are hardly yet prepared to understand the great mystery, even if told of it, owing to the great injustice and wrong done, I am empowered to allow you a glimpse behind the veil. This state of hers is intimately connected with her occult training in Tibet, and due to her being sent out alone into the world to gradually prepare the way for others. After nearly a century of fruitless search, our chiefs had to avail themselves of the only opportunity to send out a European body upon European soil to serve as a connecting link between that country and our own. You do not understand? Of course not. Please then remember what she tried to explain and what you gathered tolerably well from her, namely the fact of the 7 principles in the complete human being. And I wish to ask at this point, how many of you people here are familiar with the 7 principles? Atma, Buddhi, Manas, Kama, Prana, Linga Sharira, which is the astral body, and Stula Sharira, which is the physical envelope encompassing all. How many have read or studied about the 7 principles of man? Very good. Now, no man or woman, unless he be an initiate of the 5th circle, can leave the precincts of Bodla and return back into the world in his integral whole, if I may use the expression. One at least of his 7 satellites has to remain behind for 2 reasons. The first, to form the necessary connecting link, the wire of transmission. The second, as the safest warrantor that certain things will never be divulged. She is no exception to the rule, and you have seen another exemplar, a highly intelligent man who had to leave one of his skins behind, hence is considered highly eccentric. The bearing and status of the remaining 6 depend upon the inherent qualities of psychophysiological peculiarities of the person, especially upon the idiosyncrasies transmitted by what modern science calls atavism. Acting in accordance with my wishes, my brother Moria made to you through her a certain offer, if you remember. You had but to accept it, and at any time you liked, you would have had for an hour or more the real Bachuli to converse with, instead of the psychological cripple you generally have to deal with now. This letter in 1881 explains that she was the instrument that brought these teachings again to what we would call now the Aquarian Age. Now, just to deviate for a moment, there are cycles, smaller cycles within vaster cycles, and there's a precessional cycle that lasts for some 25,920 years that have to do with the constellations, the zodiacal constellations. And the Earth has its own zodiacal belt, and those who have studied astrology know about that. Now, in the precession of the equinoxes, 1/12 of 25,920 years is a period of 2,160 years, which is called a Messianic Cycle. And so every beginning of a new Messianic Cycle, a messenger is sent to the world anew from the Brotherhood of Adepts to restate again in their pristine purity the teachings of the ancient wisdom. Now, the previous cycle was the Piscean Age, and the person who was the emissary at that time is known to us as Jesus, who brought the message to the Mediterranean people. And Blavatsky came to the Occidental world. Now, this first letter has established that she is their messenger. It points out that she had special training. She was an initiated chela of the Mahatmas. And we wish to go from the year 1881 into that section marked 3, which is an article from the Collected Writings, Volume 10. And this is very special because it takes us to the time after the Cologne affair and the devastating report about Blavatsky by the Society of Psychical Research and all the trials and tribulations she had. And she was about to publish The Secret Doctrine. It came out in October of 1888. And she was also surrounded by a group of students in England that were going to be very prominent in the Eastern School of Theosophy, her esoteric section, and then her inner school group. Now, Colonel Alcott was the manager of the business of the Theosophical Society, and HPB was the teacher. And occasionally, even he didn't understand. And The article that I've excerpted in full, it's a very important article, but particularly germane to today's talk with you, because it gives an account in the compiler's note of the history of that time, and it gives the mood of Alcott, out of which he received a very important letter on his way from Bombay and before he had reached Brindisi, Italy, telling him what to do and addressing his doubts and his negative thoughts about his old chum, H.P. Blavatsky. So I hope that you will want to read all of it and all the footnotes. It's very pertinent and very, very interesting, and we'll pick it up on page 137 of your green packet. And Blavatsky is writing here, and further, to remove misconceptions, it is as well, of course, only for the information of members of the Society, to add that while still at sea on board the Shannon, on his way from Bombay to Brindisi, and on the day before arriving at port, the President received in his cabin a long and important letter from the said master, generally called Kudhumi. Beside general instructions respecting the policy the President should pursue in the present crisis, there were the following paragraphs relating to his colleague, the undersigned. Colonel Alcott's sense of justice is so strong, and although some of the passages in the letter have a tone of reproach for his having permitted himself to think too harshly of his old and tried friend and co-worker, he has unreservedly given permission to copy the passages in extenso in the hope that the warning conveyed may prove profitable to others who find themselves in a hostile mood toward the undersigned. The passages are as follows. Put all needed restraint upon your feelings. This is Kudhumi in the letter to Alcott. So that you may do the right thing in this Western imbroglio. Watch your first impressions. The mistakes you make spring from your failure to do this. Let neither your personal predilections, affections, suspicions, nor antipathies affect your action. One of the most valuable effects of Upasika's mission. Now, Upasika is the name that was used by the Mahatmas for Blavatsky. It means female chela. Is that it drives men to self-study and destroys in them blind servility for persons. Observe your own case, for example. But your revolt, good friend, against her infallibility, as you once thought it, has gone too far, and you have been unjust to her, for which I am sorry to say, you will have to suffer hereafter, along with others. Just now on deck, your thoughts about her were dark and sinful. And so I find the moment a fitting one to put you on your guard. Try to remove such misconceptions as you will find by kind persuasion and an appeal to the feelings of loyalty to the cause of truth, if not to us. Make all these men feel that we have no favorites, nor affections for persons, but only for their good acts and humanity as a whole. But we employ agents, the best available. Of these, for the last 30 years, the chief has been the personality known as HPB. Now, this was 1888, so before the formation of the Theosophical Society itself, going back 30 years. they were preparing her for her mission. And of course, it is known, but very hiddenly known, that she was trained in Tibet, and a very mysterious period. No one knows about that period of her life. She also had a time where she traveled extensively over America, and she traveled extensively in South America. And when I was researching the secret doctrine for Boris Dezerkov, their cartology is a very important thing at the Newberry Library, and I had just sent him something of interest, and he wanted to know more about it because he felt that perhaps she had traveled cross-country in one of the wagon trains that was being addressed in that little pamphlet that I had sent him. So for the last 30 years, the chief has been the personality known as HPB to the world, but otherwise to us. Imperfect and very troublesome, no doubt, she proves to some. Nevertheless, there is no likelihood of our finding a better one for years to come, and your theosophists should be made to understand it. Now skip the next little paragraph. Her fidelity to our work being constant, and her sufferings having come upon her through it, neither I nor my brother associates will desert or supplant her. As I once before remarked, ingratitude is not among our vices. To help you in your present perplexity, HPB has next to no concern with administrative details and should be kept clear of them so far as his strong nature can be controlled. But this you must tell to all. With occult matters, she has everything to do. We have not abandoned her. She is not given over to chelas. She is our direct agent. I warn you against permitting your suspicions and resentments against her many follies to bias your intuitive loyalty to her. In the adjustment of this European business, you will have two things to consider: the external and administrative, and the internal and psychical. Keep the former under your control, and that of your most prudent associates jointly. Leave the latter to her. And there's a very interesting thing about the secret doctrine. I have also noted your thoughts about the secret doctrine. Be assured that what she has not annotated from scientific and other works, we have given or suggested to her. Every mistake or erroneous notion corrected and explained by her from the works of other theosophists was corrected by me or under my instruction. It is a more valuable work than its predecessor, which was Isis Unveiled, of course, an epitome of occult truths that will make it a source of information and instruction for the earnest student for long years to come. Now, as a result of that letter, Colonel Alcott went and had a different attitude about the purpose of the Eastern School of Theosophy that was about to come into being, and he did the right thing. Now, in addition to this, there's a little blue page, 3-page excerpt from Reminiscences, and I'm not going to read that to you. I put that there. You might want to look it up because it has to do with a very important and well-known incident with the first president of the Germania Theosophical Society, a Dr. Hubie Schleiden, who received a couple of certificates from the masters saying that the secret doctrine will be the production of Upasika, my brother Maria, and myself, and a second certificate verifying that by Moria himself on the back of it. So I enclose that for your pleasure. Now, the second letter that we're going to touch here is going to be letter number 44 on page 263. It's in the first packet, and we're going to tie it up with the pink packet here. And this letter, I have three little points where we're going to sidetrack into the other letters to corroborate the information and develop it a little bit. And this has to do with the actual formation of the Theosophical Society, and will answer the question that has always appeared in the minds of so many people. Well, if the Mahatmas can do these wonderful things, why do they let this happen in the Theosophical Society? And this answers that question. We begin on the 17th of November next, and this is 1882, February. The septenary term of trial given the Society at its foundation, in which to discreetly preach us, will expire. One or two of us hoped that the world had so far advanced intellectually, if not intuitionally, that the occult doctrine might gain an intellectual acceptance, and the impulse given for a new cycle of occult research. Others, wiser as it would now seem, held differently, but consent was given for the trial. It was stipulated, however, that the experiment should be made independently of our personal management, that there should be no abnormal interference by ourselves. So casting about, we found in America the man to stand as leader. Of course, that's Colonel Olcott, a man of great moral courage, unselfish, and having other good qualities. He was far from being the best, but as Mr. Hume speaks in HPB's case, he was the best one available. With him, we associated a woman of most exceptional and wonderful endowments. Combined with them, she had strong personal defects. But just as she was, there was no second to her living fit for this work. And in the first letter, they searched for almost 100 years to find someone to be their messenger. We sent her to America, brought them together, and the trial began. From the first, both she and he were given to clearly understand that the issue lay entirely with themselves, and both offered themselves for the trial for certain remuneration in the far distant future, as Kudhumi would say, soldiers volunteer for a forlorn hope. For the 6.5 years, they have been struggling against such odds as would have driven off anyone who was not working with the desperation of one who stakes life and all he prizes on some desperate supreme effort. Their success has not equaled the hopes of their original backers, phenomenal as it has been in certain directions. In a few more months, the term of probation will end. If by that time the status of the society as regards ourselves, the question of the brothers be not definitely settled, either dropped out of the society's program or accepted on our own terms, that will be the last of the brothers of all shapes and colors, sizes, or degrees. We will subside out of public view like a vapor into the ocean. Only those who have proved faithful to themselves and to truth through everything will be allowed further intercourse with us. Now, attached to this is letter number 8 in the Mahatma letters. It's a long letter, and it has some very fascinating points of how the Mahatmas were explaining to Sinet why they could not visit him astrally, why they could not talk to him over the airwaves and all. And that's all in there, and it'll give you a great deal of food for thought in understanding how they work behind the scenes. And the first reference here is right from the first part I started to read. One or two of us had hoped that the world had so far advanced intellectually, if not intuitionally, that the occult doctrine might gain an intellectual acceptance and the impulse given for a new cycle of occult research. Now, the Mahatmas are the custodians of the ancient wisdom. And this experiment is further brought out on page 34 of the little red sheet here. And they talk about that, and the reference was being given to Sinet in the hopes that he might include it in his forthcoming book as he was going on holiday to England for 3 months. The first book, The Occult World. And so Kudhumi is saying, then you will, of course, aim to show that this theosophy is no new candidate for the world's attention, but only the restatement of principles which have been recognized from the very infancy of mankind. The historic sequence ought to be succinctly yet graphically traced through the successive evolutions of philosophical schools and illustrated with accounts of the experimental demonstrations of occult power ascribed to various thaumaturgists, the alternate breakings out and subsidences of mystical phenomena, as well as their shiftings from one center to another of population, show the conflicting play of the opposing forces of spirituality and animalism. And lastly, it will appear that the present tidal wave of phenomena, with its varied effects upon human thought and feeling, made the revival of theosophical inquiry an indispensable necessity. I bring a underscoring of this particular bit that I've read to your attention because we are presently in a psychic epidemic. And if you study that very carefully and follow what phenomena is and what the Mahatmas have to say about it throughout the Mahatma letters, and that psychic is not spiritual, they're two different things, it will be very well worth your while to study it thoroughly. Then the next reference was to the word forlorn hope, and here again is a second reference to themselves, that they were not allowed to interfere personally. What I meant by the forlorn hope was that when one regards the magnitude of the task to be undertaken by our theosophical volunteers, and especially the multitudinous agencies arrayed and to be arrayed in opposition, we may well compare it to one of those desperate efforts against overwhelming odds that the true soldier glories to attempt. You have done well to see the large purpose in the small beginnings of the Theosophical Society. Of course, if we had undertaken to found and direct it en propria persona, very likely it would have accomplished more and made fewer mistakes. But we could not do this, nor was it the plan. Our two agents are given the task and left as you are now. to do the best they could under the circumstances, and much has been wrought. Now, as we've been going through this, you've noted, I hope, a certain standard of conduct which prevails in their ethical pattern of how they treat other people. Like they said, we have no favorites, but they treat the truth and that. And then that they would not, ingratitude was not among their vices. And in here, if I can backtrack to it very quickly, is one of my very, very favorite lines from them. It's on page 31. And it regards truth. Kuthumi says, "But if you believe in my friendship for you, if you value the word of honor of one who never during his whole life polluted his lips with an untruth." That's wonderful. And that was also said of Damodar. I read somewhere that he had never lied. And when we look at the world around us, perhaps ourselves, and we see what a violation of just that simple thing, how easily we tell a white lie. We were discussing that in a group that we were studying with one time, and someone said, "Oh yes, I tell white lies." And I said, "There are no white lies. There may be more serious lies, but the point is to always tell the truth." And that really is the meaning of, or I would address it, of what HPB means in the voice of the silence when she says that we have to attain to the childlike state again. Now that doesn't mean to be childish, of course, but it does mean the purity, the innocence. If you ask a child a question, they will answer you very directly and very truthfully, because they have not yet learned the ways of the world and how to get all that they think is the best for them at the expense of other people. And I think that William Quan Judge put it all very beautifully. He said that on the path that leads to spiritual attainment, altruism has to be made the code of life. Thinking of others more than ourselves, and doing the right thing at all times and in all circumstances, no matter what. Now, the next thing that I'm going to bring to your attention involves the suffering of H.P. Blavatsky. And when we glean what her life was, what the life of any martyred messenger is, we will probably have certainly a deeper appreciation of her, not to idealize her as a person, but what she went through, that we may today have all of the teachings to study. The first letter, it's the yellow group, yellow and orange, is 1885, that she wrote to Mrs. Sinnett, and both of these excerpts have to do with her being kept phenomenally alive twice after she was supposed to, the body was supposed to have deceased. And this is a letter to Mrs. Sinnett that tells what she not only went through, but could foresee and knowingly knew what she had to face. So on page 103, where I've begun the underlining, "Never, never shall you, or even could you, realize with all your earnestness and sympathy for me and your naturally keen perceptions all I had to suffer for the last 10 years. What could people know of me? The exterior carcass fattened on the lifeblood of the interior wretched prisoner, and people perceived only the first, never suspecting the existence of the latter. And remember, in the first letter that I wrote, Mr. Sinnett had the opportunity of conversing for about an hour or more with the real Bachuli, as they called it, the real person who was imprisoned in the body. And that first was charged with ambition, love of cheap fame, mercenary objects, with fraud and deceit, cunning and unscrupulousness, lying and cheating by the average outsider. With insincerity and untruthfulness, suspected even of passing off deliberately bogus phenomena by my best, my dearest friends, bound up as I was from head to foot by my pledge, an oath involving my future life, aye, even lives. What could I do, since I was forbidden to explain all, but insist on the truth of the little I was permitted to give out and deny simply the unfair charges? And that, what she explains there, was one of the dilemmas that faced her, because many things she was not permitted to explain, and people were pressing her all around for explanations that she could not go into. My dearest Mrs. Sinnett, my heart is broken, physically and morally. For the first, I do not care. Master shall take care of it. Master shall take care it shall not burst, so long as I am needed. In the second case, there is no help. Master can and shall not interfere with karma. My heart is broken not for what my true open enemies have done, them I despise, but for the selfishness, the weak-heartedness in my defense, the readiness shown to accept and even to force me to all manner of sacrifices. When masters are my witnesses, I was ready to shed the last drop of life in me, give up every hope, for the last shred of, I shall not say happiness, but rest and comfort in this life of torture for the cause I serve, and as for every true theosophist. The treachery, that atmosphere of soft and sympathetic words, expressive of the utmost selfishness at the bottom of them, whether due to weakness or ambition, was something terrible. I shall not mention names. With most of them, I shall remain on good terms to my dying day, nor shall I allow them to suspect I read through them from the first. But I shall never, nor could I if I would, forget that ever memorable night during the crisis of my illness, when Master, before exacting from me a certain promise, revealed to me things that he thought I ought to know, before pledging my word to him for the work he asked me, not ordered me as he had a right to do. On that night, when Mrs. Oakley and Hartman and everyone except Bewitched expected me every minute to breathe my last, I learned all. I was shown who was right and who wrong unwittingly and who was entirely treacherous, and a general sketch of what I had to expect outlined before me. I tell you, I have learnt things on that night, things that stamped themselves forever on my soul. Black treachery, assumed friendship for selfish ends, belief in my guilt, and yet a determination to lie in my defense, since I was a convenient step to rise upon, and whatnot. Human nature I saw in all its hideousness in that short hour, when I felt one of Master's hands upon my heart, forbidding it to cease beating, and saw the other calling out, "Sweet future," before me. "Are you willing?" I said yes, and thus signed my wretched doom for the sake of the few who were entitled to his thanks. Shall you believe me if I say that among those few your two names stood prominent? You may disbelieve or perhaps doubt, yet it was so. Death was so welcome at that hour, rest so needed, so desired. Life like the one that stared me in the face and that is realized now, so miserable. Yet how could I say no to him who wanted me to live? But all this is perhaps incomprehensible to you, though I do hope it is not quite so. Now this letter, as I said, was 1885. And during the writing of The Secret Doctrine, the Countess Wachtmeister spent time with HPB, and out of it we have this fascinating story and splendid insight into HPB as she knew her from the standpoint of being her companion and one who took care of her. And this is in Ostend in March 1887. The night passed quietly. Several times the following day, Dr. Ellis massaged her until he was quite exhausted, but she got no better. Then, to my horror, I began to detect the peculiar faint odor of death, which sometimes precedes dissolution. I hardly dared hope that she would live through the night, and while I was sitting alone by her bedside, she opened her eyes and told me how glad she was to die, and that she thought the Master would let her be free at last. Still, she was very anxious about her secret doctrine. I must be most careful of her manuscripts and hand over all to Colonel Alcott with directions to have them printed. She had hoped that she would have been able to give more to the world. But the Master knew best, and so she talked on at intervals, telling me many things. At last she dropped off into a state of unconsciousness, and I wondered how it would all end. Day after day she had suffered tortures, both of mind and body. Of mind, through the falsity and treachery of those who had called themselves friends, and then had slandered her behind her back, casting stones at her, while they, in their ignorance, thought she would never know the hand that had thrown them. And of the body, because she was compelled to remain in a form which should have disintegrated 2 years previously at Adyar. And her letter was a description of how she was saved from that. If it had not been held together by occult means, when she decided to live on and work for those who were still to come into the Theosophical Society. None of those who knew her really understood her. Even to me, who had been alone with her for so many months, she was an enigma, with her strange powers, her marvelous knowledge, her extraordinary insight into human nature, and her mysterious life spent in regions unknown to ordinary mortals, so that though her body might be near, her soul was often away in commune with others. Many a time I have observed her thus and known that only the shell of her body was present. Such were the thoughts which passed through my mind as I sat hour after hour through that anxious night, watching her as she seemed to be getting weaker and weaker. A wave of blank despondency came over me as I felt how truly I loved this noble woman, and I realized how empty life would be without her. No longer to have her affection and her confidence would be a most severe trial. My whole soul rose in rebellion at the thought of losing her. I gave a bitter cry and knew no more. When I opened my eyes, the early morning light was stealing in, and a dire apprehension came over me that I had slept, that perhaps HPB had died during my sleep, died whilst I was untrue to my vigil. I turned towards the bed in horror, and there I saw HPB looking at me calmly with her clear gray eyes as she said, "Countess, come here." I flew to her side. "What has happened, HPB? You look so different from what you did last night." She replied, "Yes, Master has been here. He gave me my choice, that I might die and be free if I would, or I might live and finish the secret doctrine. He told me how great would be my sufferings and what a terrible time I would have before me in England, for I am to go there. But when I thought of those students to whom I shall be permitted to teach a few things, and of the Theosophical Society in general, to which I have already given my heart's blood, I accepted the sacrifice. And now, to make it complete, fetch me some coffee and something to eat, and give me my tobacco box." So we have, in what I have prepared there, an outline of the special training that H.P. Blavatsky went through, that she was the messenger for this Messianic cycle called the Aquarian Age. And speaking of which, I have a very interesting little footnote that I've capsuled from volume 8 in her article, The Esoteric Character of the Gospels. She's speaking about Messianic cycles, and she talks of 3 of them. The one when the equinox went into the sign of the Ram, which she equated to 2410 and BC, and then the Piscean one, which was 255 BC. And she adds that when it enters in a few years, this was 1887, when it enters in a few years the sign of Aquarius, psychologists will have some extra work to do, and the psychic idiosyncrasies of humanity will enter on a great change. So we are technically in the Aquarian Age. And one of the reasons that there's so much turmoil in the world is precisely due to the fact that there are these 2 great cycles in time that are still merged together, because nothing moves at a sharp break-off point in nature. It moves imperceptibly out of one condition and into the other. So we have the old forces and the new forces clashing, and here we have a cosmic house cleaning, you might say, and a lot of things bubbling up to the surface that certainly are very unpleasant. And we also have the psychic era that we're in, and much harm being wrought through all that is happening because of it. Now, in this last wonderful 2 pages that were compiled for you, we have just down from HPB's literary achievements, the third little paragraph that picks up just before her writing. Let us now consider the 7 kinds of process involved in her writings. Each one will be considered separately, beginning with the one in which Madame Blavatsky displayed her talents as a writer. We have descriptive writing, writing by means of instruction, writing by dictation, writing by directive clairvoyance, writing by psychometry, writing by means of precipitation, writing by means of a process analogous to tulku. Now, in the paragraph beneath it, it gives some astonishing facts. First, it talks about her literary production, and of course now I think we're all aware that there are 14 volumes of the miscellaneous articles that she had written, all contained in 14 volumes, compiled by Boris Dezerkov over his lifetime, and much of it helped by those at Point Loma who were, some of them, personal pupils of H.P. Blavatsky. So a great deal of thought and historical events have gone in to prefacing these articles, as the one that I gave you about the letter on the Shannon that Colonel Alcott had received. And in addition to that, there is a bio-bibliographical part in the back of each one of the collected writings that gives a mini sketch of the people involved in that particular year and their relevance to what they did in the Theosophical Society of that time. So just by reading these fascinating articles, including some of the stories she wrote that were later published as Nightmare Tales. And she has one that is astonishing, that really gives an insight of what we go through in the first clearinghouse of death in the Kamaloka. And it's called A Bewitched Life. Fascinating. All her stories are. If you like phenomena, read her stories. Now, when we stop to think, rather, that all this material was written in pen and ink. She didn't have a pool of secretaries taking shorthand. She wrote everything by hand in pen and ink in less than 17 years. And I submit, at least I'm speaking for myself, if I could understand a fair portion of these teachings in a whole lifetime, I would consider myself very, very fortunate indeed. So we study in a lifetime what she produced in less than 17. Remarkable. Now, there's a little point I'd like to make about head learning and heart wisdom. In head learning, as we get it in school from the lowest to the highest educational schools, we absorb knowledge from the heads of others. We cram for exams and we learn what they have found and given us. But for soul wisdom, we have to read the teachings she brought, or the technical teachings of theosophy, with the heart, because we cannot see things of the spirit with eyes of the flesh. So empirical knowledge we absorb through eyes of the flesh. But the teachings of theosophy, of the operation of nature in the universe and in man as part of the oneness of all life, has to be something that we study in our heart, and we all stand at a different place in our ring pass not of consciousness. And therefore there are no creeds or dogmas in theosophy, because our understanding each to each will be just a little bit different. Sometimes we might feel, well, I don't quite agree with this. Well, if you don't agree with it, don't accept it. But put it on the shelf, don't make an opinion about it, and perhaps some other time when you learn a little more, you might then take up the subject that you didn't understand perhaps and take a new look at it. And so we come to the relevance of theosophy today. I do think that with all that is extant in the world of the writings of H.P. Blavatsky, we're talking about her, so I will limit it to her precisely, that we have available to us in a country where we are not told that we may not have these books and we may not have groups of study on these subjects. We have freely accessible this wealth of material. And my own sense is that the world over, there are individuals and maybe small groups of people, a couple here and a couple there, studying these teachings, discussing them, pondering over them, people that we will never know about, that make up the body of the Theosophic movement. And therefore, I think they're very relevant today. I think they're more relevant today than in Blavatsky's own day, because the thought of these teachings has percolated through the consciousness level of the world at large. We're using a lot of Sanskrit terms, and even in popular advertising. The Karma flower shop, for instance, and all. And I do understand that from Point Loma Publications, the most widely sought book that is sought there is Jeffrey Barbourka's little book, to which he has a tape also, called Sanskrit Terms. And the tape gives you the correct svara, that means pronunciation, as far as he would know it. So that the relevance of theosophy today, I think, is ongoing. And the relevance of theosophy for the future will be strictly in accordance to how we live the life to know the doctrine. If we cannot study these teachings intellectually. Thou canst not travel on the path until thou hast become that path itself, says the voice of the silence. So if we're reading the teachings with the heart, we have to aspire to become the very best that we have within us to be. And that best will grow as we practice more and more and more. And the teachings of theosophy, the true teachings of Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, the messenger of the Mahatmas, is in our hands to promulgate the true teachings and keep them pure. Her last words spoken upon her death, May 8th, 1891, was, "Do not let my last incarnation be a failure. Keep the link unbroken." And we will do that in proportion to promulgating the truth and to living up to the teachings. And so in closing, I've selected a very short passage that I think is a profile of herself, followed by 2 little stanzas or shlokas from the Voice of the Silence. There is no danger that dauntless courage cannot conquer. There is no trial that spotless purity cannot pass through. There is no difficulty that strong intellect cannot surmount. For those who win onwards, there is reward past telling, the power to bless and save humanity. Compassion is no attribute. It is the law of laws, eternal harmony, Alaya's self, a shoreless universal essence, the light of everlasting right and fitness of all things, the law of love eternal. So shalt thou be in full accord with all that lives. Bear love to men as though they were thy brother pupils, disciples of one teacher, the sons of one sweet mother. And so if we have brotherhood in our heart and we live the teachings of theosophy, we honor H.P. Blavatsky by being one of her pupils and one of her theosophic family. And I thank you very much.
Following the lecture, Miss Urban answered audience members' questions. However, due to recording limitations during the program, we found it necessary to re-ask those questions in the studio. The first question came from a man wanting further information about the Mahatmas.
The Mahatmas are human beings, men and some women. It's not relegated to sex, who have reached the full maturity of their humanhood. And at that stage of human maturation, they have a much broader vision, and with it a much broader power at that level of their evolutional unfoldment than we have as human beings. You might say that in evolutional unfoldment, the monad goes through all the schools of life in the hierarchical division of life as we know it in our system. You have the 3 elemental kingdoms, the mineral kingdom, the vegetable kingdom, the animal kingdom, and the human kingdom. And above us, we have the kingdom of the Nirmanakayas, the beginning of the kingdoms of life that we look up to as the God kingdoms. Now, we are only half human in our evolutional unfoldment. We are baby humans, and we sure act it, don't we? We are developing the principle that I enumerated at the beginning: Atma, Buddhi, Manas, Kama, Prana, Linga Sharira, and Stula Sharira. We are now evolving through a phase of time in the planetary chain that we live upon and have our peregrinations around. We are in the part that is developing the kamic nature, the desire nature. And so we live in that, and all we have to do is look around us and we say, or we see rather, that people think with their feelings, not with their reason and judgment. And they live in the taste buds of their animal propensities, the feelings. I gotta have this, I gotta be here, I'll just die if I can't make it. They don't think or they reason. I'm speaking about humanity at large, and ourselves from time to time, though we're trying to rise above it and become more impersonal. Now, every lifetime that we live gives us a vaster experience in the human schoolroom. So we come back after every lifetime with something added, a little more in our inherent intuitive bank of knowledge that permits us to meet the slings and arrows of the karma we caused unto ourselves with greater thought, hopefully. And if not, we'll keep hitting our head against that wall until we learn by pain and experience what we cannot do with reason and judgment. So the Mahatmas are human beings who stand at the top, the full flowering of humanity, and they are devoid of two of the qualities that we live in almost completely. One of them is the personality, the ego. The second is they have vacated the emotional nature. They live in their Buddhic principle, which we can only touch intuitively. When we have an intuition, well, we know something is right, but we don't know how we knew it. It has no feeling to it, it's just a clear thought. That is an intuitional insight. And if we have that and we begin to follow it, we will have inner guidance from our own higher self. So the Mahatmas are the elder brothers of humanity who stay back and try to help us upward to fulfill our human heritage. Does that answer your question?
A follow-up question had to do with the information purported to have come from those Mahatmas associated with the Theosophical founders. Since much of the information given came through other individuals like Madame Blavatsky, can it be viewed as channeled material?
No. The difference between a medium and a mediator. A medium has to be in trance. She's not in control of what happens to her or him. But a mediator is one who, self-consciously awake, can transmit these things. Mediumship, according to all that I study from H.P. Blavatsky and the Mahatma letters, is not a good thing. And channeling is you become the puppet of whatever forces can control you. But a mediator is one, and in old diary leaves, the first volume of old diary leaves, it gives a very wonderful description of how Isis Unveiled was written through the writings of Alcott, and how various personages stepped into H.P.'s form and used that instrument to write, and he could identify various ones. Very, very interesting. This is a very intricate subject of study, and we'll be here till next Thursday if we attempt to address it. So if you don't mind, I'm going to take, what time, one more question?
The last question was from a person wanting to know why Madame Blavatsky had to endure so much suffering.
We would find it utterly impossible unless through her readings we could transport our mind back to her era of more than 100 years ago and glean the conditions of life at that period. Now, science knew everything in the world that was to be known at that time. And religion had control of you, and if you didn't believe what your padre said, you were excommunicated. So she had, as one of the excerpts said, she had all of these forces arrayed and to be arrayed against her to destroy her because she threatened their selfish interests. The slogan of theosophy, that's not the right word, but the banner of theosophy is, "There is no religion higher than truth." And so HPB brought again the truth to mankind in a new installment. And she didn't bring all of it because we're not deserving to have all of it. And if you take your example of why did she suffer, did you ever take an unpopular cause that was a just cause and stand up for it? Did you suffer the slings and arrows of the opponent? Now, when you take someone with so important a message that is going to be the cornerstone for the next Aquarian age lasting 2,160 years, and you have against that all the interests that find this not to be desirable in their behalf, they're going to do everything to destroy her. And she was a sick woman, and she had tremendous will. Someone called her the lion-hearted, and that little profile that I read certainly would speak of someone who was lion-hearted and had great courage and the ability to do it. Most people today say, "I don't want to get involved," and they run around and away from something, don't they? But Theosophy teaches you to be self-reliant. And if you believe something, believe it with all your heart. If you're not sure, fine. But if you believe something, be able to stand up for it and speak for it no matter what. You will begin to exhibit some of the strength that it takes in a very, very small way. There's a very encouraging statement made by Judge. He has these quick little sentences, and he says, "We have someday to be able to withstand any shock." Well, let us be able to withstand any little shock that happens us today. Take it bravely, accept it as our karmic pattern, because nothing can happen to us that's not in our karmic pattern. And what did we do to bring it about? Handle it at a very high level with intelligence and reason, and you will be fulfilling a very noble part of your own better self in the way you live. See, we can't change people by coerciveness, by hitting them over the head with these teachings. But we will change people's hearts by the example that we show ourselves to be among the people that fill our world in the daily day experiences that are our karmic necessity.